Welcome to true deep love story, where hearts speak louder than words and silence carries its own truth. Tonight's story, He Acted Like He Loved Me, isn't just about heartbreak. It's about the quiet deception that hides behind tenderness, the illusion that feels like forever until it fades in silence. Here, love begins with warmth that feels like safety, grows into laughter that feels like forever, cracks beneath distance that feels like indifference, and ends with awakening the painful truth that not everyone who acts in love truly feels it. So listen closely. Every word, every pause, every heartbeat in this story belongs to the love that almost was, and the lesson that remains, because sometimes the most beautiful lies are told with gentle eyes. He spoke with the kind of calm that could quiet storms. Every word carried a warmth that felt rare, like sunlight breaking through a long winter. The way his eyes lingered, steady but gentle, created an invisible thread, something soft yet unshakable. There was a rhythm in his voice that settled everything restless inside. Each sentence felt deliberate, as if he weighed every word before letting it fall between them. There was never a rush, no grand confessions. No chase, just presence unspoken, steady and kind. When he laughed, it was never too loud. It was quiet, honest, and almost shy. The world seemed to slow around him. Even silence became something sacred, a space filled with meaning instead of emptiness. In the beginning, everything felt new and yet deeply familiar. His presence carried comfort that shouldn't have existed between two souls still learning each other's edges. It was the way his gaze softened when listening, how his voice lowered when speaking of things that mattered. Even in crowded rooms, there was a quiet awareness between them, a recognition, an understanding, something unnamed but deeply known. When his hand brushed against another, it wasn't planned, just a brief moment of closeness that somehow stayed longer than it should have. The touch wasn't searching or uncertain. It was warm, confident, yet careful, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. There was no need to explain it. Some things didn't need words. Every small gesture carried weight. A cup of tea offered without asking, a glance shared in silence, the way time stretched when he was near. It was all so ordinary, and yet it felt like everything that had ever been missing finally had a shape. There were moments when the world faded, when the only sound that mattered was the quiet rhythm of breathing that wasn't alone anymore. Days blurred into weeks, and still, the same gentle energy lingered. Conversations wandered through everything: dreams, fears, the small details of everyday life that rarely find a listener. He remembered things others forgot, tiny details tucked between moments, a favorite song, a look that meant more than words ever could. It wasn't what he said, but the way he said it, the pauses, the sincerity, the stillness between thoughts. He never promised forever. He didn't have to. The way he showed up made time feel like it could stop trying to prove itself. There was something unspoken, an invisible honesty that felt safer than any vow. It wasn't about perfection. It was about presence, that rare kind of attention that doesn't demand anything in return. Nights carried a softer glow when his name filled the air. Even the simplest messages carried warmth, like whispers of belonging. Words became more than letters. They became touch, closeness, and care. There was a rhythm between them, quiet but certain, the kind that builds slowly, almost unknowingly, until it becomes everything. Sometimes he would fall silent mid-conversation, and instead of discomfort, there was peace. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of something that couldn't be said aloud. In those moments, time didn't move forward. It lingered, and it was enough. The heart learns language through feeling, not words. His presence spoke fluently in the way he waited, the way he listened, the way he noticed without trying to fix. Love didn't need to be named to be real. It existed in the pauses, the in-betweens, the quiet acts that no one else saw. There were days when laughter came easily, like sunlight spilling through an open window. Days when small things, a glance, a joke, a shared silence felt like the world itself. There was no need to question it. It simply was. When he looked, it wasn't just at a face. It was through it into something deeper, unseen but known. His gaze carried understanding, the kind that doesn't need explanations. the kind that says, you matter, even here, even now. There's a strange beauty in being seen without having to speak. That's what his eyes did. They saw without demanding, understood without asking. Every look felt like a promise made quietly, one the heart believed without needing proof. Even the simplest things, the way he said a name, the way his fingers rested near, the quiet tilt of his head when listening felt intentional, meaningful. It was as though he carried an entire world in small gestures, a tenderness that could make the smallest moment feel infinite. Sometimes, when the air was still and the world outside too loud, there was a calm that only he could bring. His voice could steady the trembling parts of the soul that never dared to show. And maybe that's why the heart opened so easily, not because it was ready, but because it felt safe enough to risk being broken. It's strange how quickly comfort can become necessity, how easily kindness can turn into the air one breathes. There was no realization of falling, it just happened quietly, like a soft descent that didn't feel like falling at all. And yet, somewhere in that gentle beginning, love bloomed in silence, not loud, not demanding, but real. The kind of love that grows in stillness, that doesn't need to announce itself. A love that feels like home before it even begins. Maybe that's what made it so dangerous, the ease, the sincerity, the illusion of forever wrapped in simplicity. Because when someone acts like they love with such quiet conviction, the heart doesn't think to question it. It only listens. It believes. It builds its world around the sound of their voice and the warmth of their presence. And when that kind of love is just an act, when it ends, it doesn't shatter in noise. It breaks in silence, the same way it began. Because sometimes the most painful love stories don't end with betrayal or anger. They end with realization that the warmth, the tenderness, the you matter, whispered in silence, were never rooted in truth. They were only part of the act. And even then, the memory of that gentle beginning remains. Soft, beautiful, deceptive, the kind of beginning that teaches the heart what love could be and what it should have never been mistaken for. The nights began to soften the moment his voice became part of them. It wasn't about what he said, but the way his words lingered long after the conversation ended. They carried warmth that reached deeper than distance, threading through quiet spaces until silence felt full instead of empty. There was something about the way he spoke, low, thoughtful, almost careful, that made time feel slower, safer. The illusion began gently. It never announced itself. It grew through laughter that came too easily, through the comfort of familiar good nights and the rhythm of shared secrets. The days blended together, and suddenly there was a pattern. Morning messages late, night calls, small pieces of affection that felt too genuine to question. He never asked for anything, yet somehow gave everything a person could need to believe in something real. It wasn't love at first sight. It was love built quietly, through gestures that felt intentional. A small compliment that felt like sunlight on a cold day. The way his tone softened when saying a name. The quiet understanding when words failed. Every gesture was gentle, perfectly timed, almost rehearsed. But it never felt that way then. It felt natural, like something falling into place. There were moments when silence carried more meaning than speech. The quiet between them was never awkward. It was heavy with emotion, filled with the kind of presence that made the world outside irrelevant. There's a rare beauty in being understood without having to explain anything. He seemed to understand without effort, without question. That's what made it feel so deep, so safe. Evenings became their own world. There was laughter that didn't need to be loud to be joyful. Small stories shared until they felt like memories instead of words. He remembered things others always forgot. The way light fell through the window, the songs that meant something, the details no one noticed, he noticed. And that made all the difference. Each conversation felt like a promise disguised as a moment. Every pause, every sigh, every whisper seemed to say, I'm here and I'm not leaving. It wasn't spoken aloud, but it was there, in the rhythm of shared breaths, in the quiet confessions that belonged to no one else. He made the ordinary feel sacred. Even a simple good night carried the weight of 1,000 emotions. Sometimes the illusion felt too perfect to be real, but love has a way of silencing doubt when the heart feels seen. The smallest gestures became proof, the way he stayed awake just to listen, the way his voice softened when the night grew long, the way his laughter felt like it belonged to someone who had found something worth keeping. It all seemed too genuine to be performance. There were nights when nothing was said, yet everything was understood. The connection didn't need language. It existed in the air between two hearts that beat to the same unspoken rhythm. It was that rhythm that made the world fade, that made time feel suspended in something fragile and beautiful. There's a strange kind of magic in believing someone feels what you feel. It's a warmth that seeps into every corner of the soul, convincing it that maybe this time it won't end in silence. Maybe this time love won't be temporary. That was the illusion's strength. It didn't shout, it whispered. It felt like truth. Days turned into patterns. Messages came at the same time, his words carrying that familiar tenderness that made the heart ache in quiet gratitude. It felt like being known, not in grand ways, but in small, intimate details. The kind that build slowly, the kind that sink deep enough to feel permanent. When laughter echoed through late night calls, it carried a rhythm that didn't belong to strangers. It belonged to two souls that had found comfort in each other's presence. He had a way of making everything feel like it mattered. The pauses, the sighs, the small stories shared at midnight. Everything he did, every word he spoke, built the illusion of something everlasting. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't wild, it was simple, calm, and real. At least it felt that way. Love didn't arrive in one grand moment. It slipped in quietly, hidden inside the comfort of routine. The heart didn't fall, it settled. It found home in the sound of his laughter, in the safety of his words, in the way he said things that made even the darkest days lighter. There was no need for declarations. The affection lived in the everyday things, the quiet check-ins, the way he noticed small changes, the way he said, "Take care," like it meant more than words could show. Those gestures became the foundation of everything. The illusion wasn't built on lies. It was built on moments that felt too real to doubt. Sometimes, while listening to his voice in the late hours of the night, the heart forgot what loneliness felt like. It forgot the ache of being unseen, the emptiness of waiting, because he filled that space so completely that there was no room for doubt. Every word he spoke became a thread weaving something beautiful, something that looked and felt like love. But illusions are patient. They don't break easily. They grow quietly, feeding on belief, on hope, on the need to be cherished. That's what makes them powerful, because when something feels real enough, it becomes indistinguishable from truth. So the heart kept believing. It believed in his laughter, in his silences, in his steady warmth. It believed that love could be simple, that it didn't have to be questioned when it felt so right. It believed that forever could live inside small, fleeting moments. And for a while it was enough. The nights stayed soft, the laughter stayed sweet, the illusion stayed alive, because even if it wasn't real, it gave meaning to the spaces between loneliness and longing. It gave the heart something to hold, something to trust. The most beautiful illusions aren't built from lies. They're built from truth wrapped in intention, from sincerity that's borrowed but convincing. That's what makes them unforgettable, because even when the truth comes later, even when everything falls apart, the memory of that warmth remains. It's impossible to unfeel something that once felt real. The illusion didn't end in one moment. It faded slowly, like music slipping into silence. But in those early nights, when his voice filled the darkness and laughter turned into comfort, it didn't matter what was real or not. It only mattered that for a while, it felt like love. And sometimes, the memory of that feeling is the hardest part to let go of. Then came the distance. Not the kind that can be measured in miles, but the kind that settles quietly between two people who used to understand each other without trying. It began in small, almost invisible ways. The pauses between messages grew longer. The warmth in his voice thinned, fading like a sunset that didn't realize it was disappearing. It wasn't that he stopped talking, it was that he stopped meaning what he said. There was a time when every word from him carried weight, when silence felt full of comfort. But now silence carried something heavier, the kind of emptiness that hurts because it used to be full. The same eyes that once searched with intensity now glanced away. They didn't hold stories anymore. They looked through, not at, and in that shift, something broke quietly without sound. It's strange how distance begins without a single goodbye. It creeps in softly, disguised as exhaustion, busyness, distraction. The messages stay the same: good morning, take care, talk later, but the feeling behind them changes. It's not neglect, it's absence. An absence that feels alive, breathing between words, growing larger every day. Once conversations flowed like a river, effortless and alive. Now they feel rehearsed. Answers come slower, colder, emptier. Where there was laughter, there's polite agreement. Where there was care, there's courtesy. It's not cruelty, it's indifference. And indifference, when it replaces love, feels like the cruelest thing in the world. He still says the right words. He still remembers the details. But the way he says them no longer carries the same heartbeat. The sound of his voice, once filled with warmth, now echoes with distance. It's practiced polite, smooth, detached, like someone performing a role they've grown tired of. The heart notices before the mind admits it. It senses the shift, the quiet withdrawal. The tone changes before the meaning does. The warmth fades before the goodbye comes. Every moment becomes an effort to keep alive what used to breathe on its own. There's a strange ache in pretending not to notice what's already gone. It's not always anger that breaks love. Sometimes it's silence. Silence that replaces connection, that fills spaces once crowded with laughter and belonging. It starts as a pause, then becomes a pattern. And before it's clear what happened, the rhythm that once kept two hearts aligned turns into noise. His eyes, once searching, now wander elsewhere, not with guilt, but with emptiness. As if they've forgotten what they used to see. That's the part that hurts the most. Realizing that the same eyes that once looked with such affection now look past, as though the story between them never existed. There's no fight, no confrontation, no closure. Just the soft unraveling of something once strong, the quiet betrayal of a fading tone. It's not dramatic, it's slow, almost gentle, like watching light fade until only shadow remains. The heart keeps reaching, but the echo it meets is no longer the same. Promises turn into placeholders. We'll talk soon. I miss you. I'm just tired. They sound familiar, but the sincerity is gone. Each one lands differently now, lighter, emptier, without the warmth that once made them feel like truth. And still, the heart believes even as it breaks, because love doesn't disappear overnight. It fades in stages, quietly, mercilessly. There are moments of denial when laughter slips through again, when a message arrives unexpectedly, when his tone softens just enough to make hope flicker. The heart clings to those fragments, desperate to believe they mean something. But deep down it knows. It knows that what once was effortless has become obligation. What once was real has become memory pretending to live. It's the small changes that hurt most, the missing goodnight, the unanswered message, the moments when presence feels like absence, when affection becomes something that needs to be asked for. The heart learns that love doesn't always leave loudly. Sometimes it leaves while still standing in front of you. There was a time when his silence meant peace. Now it means distance. Once it said, I understand you. Now it says, I'm already somewhere else. The difference is subtle but devastating. Because the truth didn't come through words, it arrived in everything unsaid. That's how endings often begin, not with arguments, but with indifference, with the loss of small kindnesses, with the disappearance of curiosity. When someone stops asking, how are you really? When their attention becomes something they offer out of habit, not desire. And still the heart tries to hold on. It rewrites excuses. It fills gaps with hope. It tries to remember the beginning, the warmth, the laughter. It tells itself that love can return, that distance is temporary. But deep down, it knows that love, once unspoken, cannot survive when silence takes over. There's an ache in realizing that the person who once felt like home now feels like a stranger who remembers your favorite song, but no longer feels its meaning. You start to miss them while they're still there. You start to grieve something that hasn't fully ended yet. He still shows up, still speaks, still smiles, but the difference lies in the tone polite, measured, empty. The heart catches the hollowness in every word, the forced laughter, the distracted glances. The performance continues, but the truth is gone. It's almost cruel how love fades quietly, no explosions, no final words, just the slow erosion of meaning until even tenderness feels like memory. And the cruelest part is that the other person rarely notices the moment they stop loving. Only the one who still does feels the weight of it. The distance grows without distance. The silence deepens without sound. And in that silence, the truth finally settles. He's no longer there. Not really. What remains is the shadow of something that once felt like forever. The heart doesn't break in one moment. It fractures in small ways through unanswered calls, hollow smiles, and polite indifference that once was love. It breaks quietly, learning that sometimes the softest goodbyes hurt the most. And when the truth finally arrives, it doesn't come through words. It arrives in silence, heavy, undeniable, final. Because love doesn't always end with goodbye. Sometimes it ends when someone stops trying to stay. It was never love, it only looked like it. Every moment, every word, every touch was crafted so beautifully that it felt real. The warmth, the tenderness, the sincerity. Each one was performed with such precision that even silence sounded honest. It was a performance that didn't need an audience, only a heart willing to believe. And belief came easily because it was easier to trust than to imagine that someone could fake something so gentle. There's a kind of brilliance in people who know how to mimic love. They study its rhythm, its tone, its softness. They know how long to hold a gaze, how to make words sound like promises, how to touch without meaning it but still make it feel like devotion. That was the role he played so effortlessly. He gave everything love is supposed to give except the part that's real. The realization didn't come like lightning. It came like dawn, slow, quiet, undeniable. It began with small things, the kind the heart tries to ignore. The laughter that didn't reach his eyes anymore. The way his attention drifted mid-sentence. The pause before saying something kind as though the line had to be remembered. At first, it was easy to excuse it as fatigue, distraction, maybe distance. But truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs time. The moments that once felt sacred began to feel rehearsed. The rhythm that once flowed naturally now felt timed. It wasn't about what changed. It was about what never truly existed. The tenderness had always been practiced. The care had always been controlled. And every expression of affection had been part of the act. He had learned how to make love look real, to borrow its language, the gentle concern, the quiet presence, the meaningful silences. But language without feeling is still empty. The heart can't survive on imitation for long. It starts to feel the hollowness behind every gesture, the absence hiding beneath the words, and once it feels it, it can never unfeel it. There was a time when his touch felt like truth. Now it felt like routine, a habit carried out with precision but no emotion. The same hands that once trembled with affection now moved mechanically. The same voice that once tremored with care now sounded composed, professional, safe. Love doesn't live in safety, it lives in vulnerability, and his heart had never been open. It had only been performing openness. There's a strange kind of cruelty in being loved falsely. It's not the lies themselves that hurt, it's the effort behind them. The intentionality, the choice to pretend when silence would have been kinder. Because love that's faked doesn't just end. It erases the memory of what was believed to be real. It leaves the heart questioning everything. Was any of it true? Was any of it deserved? Or was it just someone learning how to act long enough to be believed? The mind tries to understand, but the heart feels first. It feels the absence of authenticity long before it can name it. It feels the distance that no words can fix, and even when truth finally stands bare, the heart still aches for the illusion, because illusions don't fade easily. They cling, they haunt, they replay like a song that once brought comfort but now cuts deep. Sometimes the greatest heartbreak doesn't come from being unloved. It comes from realizing that love was never real in the first place, that every "I miss you" was said out of habit, that every smile was worn like a mask, that every moment of intimacy was only choreography meant to convince. There's a hollow sound when realization finally breaks through, a silence louder than any goodbye. The performance had been flawless. There were no cracks, no inconsistencies at first. Every word had matched its tone, every gesture its meaning. It wasn't until later that the dissonance appeared, the slight mismatch between feeling and expression, the delay in response, the stillness that followed what should have been emotion. And once seen, it couldn't be unseen. Love, real love, doesn't need to be performed. It breathes on its own. It falters, it stumbles, it's messy and unpolished. His love, however, was tidy, too perfect, too smooth, too predictable. It lacked the rawness that comes from truth, and when the illusion broke, what remained was emptiness, not anger, not betrayal, just emptiness, the kind that lingers like an echo in a place that used to be full. The heart wanted to hate him for it, but hatred needs a target, and this wasn't deception born of malice. It was detachment masquerading as care. He didn't lie because he wanted to hurt. He lied because he didn't know how to love. For him, affection was a performance, not a language. He mimicked what he saw others do, repeated what others said, and mistook the appearance of love for the act of it. But love isn't something that can be mimicked forever. Eventually, it demands truth. It exposes what's hollow. It reveals the difference between warmth and the illusion of it. And when it did, everything that once felt sacred collapsed into dust. Every word, every promise, every memory began to feel staged, stripped of meaning. The hardest part wasn't losing him. It was losing the version of him that never existed, the one the heart had built from pieces of hope, from the reflection of what it wanted to see. That's what hurt. The realization that the love remembered was never shared, only imagined. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was numb, because when a heart awakens from illusion, it doesn't scream, it exhales. It releases the weight of pretending, the exhaustion of hoping, the burden of misunderstanding performance for passion. It learns that love, when borrowed, can never fill what it promises. In that silence, something shifted. The heart, the wounded, began to see clearly. It began to understand that being fooled doesn't make love foolish, it makes it pure. Because only something genuine could believe so deeply in something false. And maybe that's what love really is. A kind of faith that keeps giving even when undeserved. He acted like he loved, and for a while it was enough to believe it. But love built on illusion can't last. It dissolves under truth, leaving behind the kind of ache that teaches more than it destroys. The kind that reshapes what love means. It was never love. It was only the reflection of it. But even reflections have light, and sometimes that light is enough to guide the heart towards something real. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories of love, loss, and awakening. Every week, we uncover emotions too deep for words and stories too real to forget. Your support keeps these voices alive, turning pain into poetry and memories into meaning. Stay with True Deep Love Story, where every ending teaches and every heartbreak whispers love was real, even if it was only for a moment. Until next time, take care of your heart. It always remembers what the mind tries to forget.